Look, a bank has gone under, actually seized by the government, but don't worry, big banks are swooning in to take control of this said bank with an offering coming very soon. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is what's happening on the internet. And when we look at the internet, everyone's kind of talking about things they don't necessarily know what they're talking about. This is a pretty reasonable, decent sized person on Twitter, and this just goes without saying. Watch who you follow. 1 month ago, a group of 11 banks made a $30 billion unsecured deposit in First Republic Bank. Not really necessarily true. Since the First Republic Bank stock is down 90%, list of banks, they go into a list of all these banks. Now, this is where things get sticky and they get a little bit confusing. So when you look at what happened, when you go back a little bit further to the collapsed banks already, SIVB and Signature Bank, when we look here, the holding companies for the two failed banks were set up by the FDIC. Skip a little bit ahead. The FDIC has guaranteed repayment of all loans that were to these specific banks because the Fed had to basically deposit like over $100 billion into those. But then we go a step further and we look at what happened specifically to FRC. As you jump in here, you can see Bank of America, Citigroup, we just went over this, all deposited a lump sum of money that was uninsured into them. But this again is where everything kind of gets a little confusing, but I expect if you're in the space to do your DD at least. Now, if we go back to what the Fed originally said, this is what was originally said when they started putting this money out there. The Fed basically took $300 billion. We all remember it because our balance sheet went up because they started taking this money and loaning it out. They sent 143, nearly half of that, to the holding companies for the two banks that have already failed. They took another 148 billion and gave that out to big banks. Which banks are those? Those are Citigroup, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, etc., your big ones. And they gave that to them in the expectation that they would loan this out to struggling banks. Now, I know this can get a little bit confusing because you're going from the Fed and then you're going to other banks, and then they're giving this out to smaller banks. And it's just like, why not just skip the middleman? Now, they don't necessarily want to have to answer those questions about where they're giving and why they're giving this to the smaller banks and why they're not giving it to other specific banks, right? Now, we can say the system's rigged. We can say that this is just the way that things go. I don't care. But when we look at this, is this actually not FDIC insured? And what were the underlying rules that the Fed wrote with these other big banks when they took these loans? That's the main question. And then when they get seized, do these big banks also get paid out when they actually get acquired? So not only did they put the 30 billion in, that was already just not even their money. It was given to them from the Fed with a pretty long payout period. So big banks are not in trouble anytime soon. But now you have the opportunity to actually profit if they do get seized or do get purchased, because you would probably get your lump sum of money even back quicker. Or better, you would actually get a little bit of a deal or a sweetener when you decide to actually acquire. Because now when we look at who's actually trying to acquire these banks, it's the same people that put that small deposit into there. Really think about what's on their balance sheet. And they could have done it with their own cash, but they did it with the Fed's money, actually scratched at the government's money. And so they're really not taking any pain out of their pocket. They're just going to get a discount on something they're probably going to acquire. And they were probably planning this the entire time. That's why they weren't making any more deposits back into these guys. Because let me tell you, they still have a lot of money that was given to them by the Fed. Also, remember, there's still $110 billion sitting out there that was given out by the Fed. And that's probably going to end up paying for more than half of this acquisition. So is the banking crisis over? I'm not going to say that it is, but what I will say is that this isn't necessarily bad for the banks that deposited money in the first place. This probably was all a part of the plan, and we're going to start seeing if more banks show weakness, we'll probably see a little bit of love given to them, and then the big purchase coming in once again. But we are seeing some love on stocks like PacW and some other names that were in somewhat of pain, and their earnings do report that they're receiving deposits once again. Their balance sheet is okay, and there's nothing too outstanding across the board. FRC does seem like the last bank to really take the, to the chopping block, but we'll have to see going forward. You do have FOMC this Wednesday, so make sure you stay prepared.